We're live. Chris, we're live.
Not according to me.
Have a look on your screen. Above you, it says live.
No, it doesn't on mine. Ah, okay, it's live now. Okay.
Yeah, it's been live for 20 seconds.
Well, I must have been frozen. Anyway, enough of the background technical issues. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's 12 Ronnie's Q&A session, which is entitled "So You Built an MVP? Now what?" And that builds on the session we had last week, which was so you had an idea. Now what? So this is part 2 because we didn't get to all the questions. So I'm here with Simon today, and before we launch into it, I just got some background admin stuff to clear up. First of all, if you want to get involved, this is an interactive session, so we encourage anybody that's in the audience to ask questions, either by writing a comment in the comments and we will see it, or by clicking the link that's in the comments for StreamYard. It's a StreamYard link. If you click on that, you will come into the studio area where Simon and I are talking to each other. So you can do it that way if you'd like to come and join us and ask the question in your own voice rather than writing to us. So without further ado, one last thing, just make sure you like on whichever platform you're watching this, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook or YouTube, please like the session, subscribe to the feed, and click the notification bell to make sure you get notified whenever any of this is happening. So Simon's put the StreamYard link in the on screen. I'll hide it now so that we can get going. All right. So Simon, last week we talked about the first 3 topics, which were to do with "I've had an idea, now what?", which were idea validation, market research and target audience, and then building a prototype or MVP. So to carry on this week, we're making the assumption that we built an MVP which has gone well and that we have validated our concept. So what happens now?
Hello, Chris. Good afternoon. Yeah, well, I think just sort of recapping a little bit from last week and from what Bill and yourself went through, it was very much, we were talking about getting to the stage of validating the idea. So is there a demand for the idea? Is there a customer need for the idea? How do you find that out? What sort of things do you need to do? And I was quite fascinated in your discussion about prototypes, because the difference between a prototype and an MVP is quite stark in that a prototype is very much an idea that is articulated, let's say, in a way that could just be a drawing. It could be a video, but it's not the actual product itself.
Right.
So you don't have to make the product. So you can validate your idea with a prototype and not having to build the actual product. Whereas an MVP is an actual product. It's a minimum viable product. It's the minimum product you need to produce to test your core assumptions about what customers want, about the problem it's solving. So it's a minimum viable, because you're looking at the viability of the product. So that was where we were sort of getting to the differentiation. And I guess you're asking what next after you.
Well, yeah, we're making the assumption that the MVP went well and we had good feedback, and people liked it. So we're now going to go ahead. We've got a green light to go ahead with something, but we've got to decide what we do next, really.
Yeah, and I guess there's lots of different things that you can do at this stage, and it depends a little bit on what you've done in the past. So we're assuming now that you've validated your idea. So you've you've been able to reach out to customers, and you've been able to either collect them on a wait list or pre-orders, or you've been able to communicate with them in a way that they've shown their interest to you. So you've also validated the different channels to communicate to them. You've now produced a product that is based on your solution to their demand. So this minimum viable product. So now, how do you get this to them? So you're in a position now where you're really looking at launching your business. You're looking at now saying, well, previous to that, I've been testing. I'm still going to do a lot of testing, but now I'm testing with an actual product, my solution to the customer need. How do I do that? Well, now it's actually going out and selling. So what structure do you need to sell to your customer base? So most of the time you're going to need to set up a company, because you're going to need a bank account. You're going to need to be able to take money. And so that involves the different sorts of structures that are available depending on your intention with the company and how you want to actually set it up to trade. So the next step from your minimum viable product is really to set up a trading entity, and that could be in many different forms.
Okay, but there's a bit of a bridge, isn't there, between, there's an MVP, which is like a single unit that you've taken a photograph of.
That's a prototype. That's a prototype, yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of building something that you can then ship to people and stuff, you need some money, to actually make the things to send to people. So that's part of the next phase.
Oh, so we haven't built the MVP yet, then you're saying?
Well, no, I mean, have we built the MVP?
If we haven't built it, we need to build it.
The MVP isn't like multiple units, is it? Or is it? Or maybe it is.
No, it's a minimum viable product. It's not a standalone widget. It's the actual product.
But it's not functionality. But it's not a set number of units, is it? Or maybe it is. Maybe we're pretty.
No, it could be 1,000 MVP units. It could be 1,000 MVP units. But it's your minimum viable product. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles. You haven't tested all the other functions that people may want.
No, I get that, but I guess this is two different stages we're talking about, isn't it? I mean, there's the basic level is to actually work out whether people like the concept of it. In terms of
that's idea validation,
yeah. And then the next phase is to scale that up into either some pre-orders or some genuine orders, isn't it?
You can do that without an MVP. You can do that without an MVP. An MVP is your product, but it's your minimum viable product. So it is actually your main product, but it doesn't have all the other functions around your product that you may be selling and all the add-ons.
No, all I'm saying is that, there will be some customers involved.
Yes,
in order to trade this thing,
So we need an entity to trade with them.
Oh,
hi, Chris. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. My connection isn't that great. That's why it didn't launch when I pressed the button to start with. Okay. I'll come out of something else. I'll just keep talking, Simon, and I'll.
Okay, yeah, and just to follow on from what we were discussing about an MVP. So an MVP is your actual product. It's not a prototype. It's something you can actually sell, and the stage then when you have this, when you've got this developed, is to actually go selling, but you need an entity to sell from. If you step back a bit, where you're building an MVP, there may be other things you need to do to build an MVP, such as raise finance to build the MVP, such as build a team to build an MVP. It depends on, Chris. I understood your question to saying you've got an MVP, what next, rather than.
Oh, I know. I just think it's my understanding was that it was simply a single unit of the thing that you had proved that you could sell, and then the next stage was to was to scale it up into, this thing that you prove works, then you would replicate it and sell that. But you're saying that essentially once you prove the concept of the MVP, you're taking orders at that point.
Yes, you're able to sell your MVP, but your MVP might not be, it's your minimum viable. You haven't put everything on there. You're just testing now your core product.
No, and I think that's important, because there may be other people that might think of MVP in the same way that I did. So that's a good clarification, I suppose. So okay, so how would we? Let's say we've got this thing and we need to get some funding. How would we do that, do you think?
So are we, just to clarify, Chris, because different stages here, are we getting funding for an MVP, or are we getting a funding to...
I'm just going by the question that I prepared, and sent you earlier. So, yes, for example, would you do crowdfunding, for example, to get some money to, make sure you've got the right distribution in place to get your product to the people who've ordered it, for example, or maybe you need to do a deal with somebody who's going to manufacture it for you, that kind of.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different funding mechanisms out there, and it's determining what resources you have, capabilities you have for those resources, and the type of product it is, and the type of market you're going after. So you mentioned crowdfunding. Crowdfunding's quite a difficult way to raise money. I know it sounds easy in that, you're asking lots of people for small amounts of money, put it all together, and you have the right sum of money. But crowdfunding is essentially a marketing campaign, a really big marketing campaign that needs lots of planning. I know you've been involved in crowdfunding, Chris. It's tons of planning needs to be put in place to run these marketing campaigns, where what you're attempting to do is get pre-orders. What you're attempting to do is to sell the product, the solution that it's being solved, and to raise money to actually produce this. So crowdfunding is very good early on, because it also offers validation. So if you're at the very, very early stage, then it's a good way of finding out, are people interested in what you're doing, and getting pre-orders and getting money in. But it's a big marketing campaign, and not everybody's suited to crowdfunding. And there are crowdfunding agencies out there that can help people, but they'll need to be paid. People that do it themselves, it's all about producing videos. It's all about going through channels. It's all about running full-length marketing campaigns. And on the opposite end of the spectrum is going to the bank for a loan, where it's effectively filling out a form, and if your bank deems you creditworthy enough and you're willing to take on that risk, it's a much easier way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a book author, and I'm aware that some of our people in the audience might be creative people, so your MVP would be your manuscript, essentially, that you prove that people would like, or you pre-sold the concept by a blurb, let's say. And there are quite a few people who've got names. In other words, they've got platforms, because over time they've built mailing lists, and mailing lists, as I'm sure you'd agree, are very important, because you own the mailing list.
It's an audience.
Yeah. Then if you've got that kind of fan club, if you like, then there are people who are crowdfunding quite successfully with respect to new books that they want to sell. So that does work quite well if you've got a name. But again, you need to get the crowd before you can do that successfully, because, as you said, it's very hard work. So
it is. And with the example, I guess you've used of books, you're producing most people, when they buy a book, look at the cover, don't they, Chris? They look at what it's about. They may read a little excerpt from the top of it, and that's when they choose to buy it, or they may choose to buy it because of the author and the other reasons. But your prototype in that case may just be the cover of the book and about what the book's going to be.
Yeah.
So you don't actually have to have written a book. That book, you can just
especially if you're already known as being an expert in that field, for example.
So your prototype's what the book would look like and what it's about, but you don't need to have written it. Your MVP in that case would be your manuscript.
Yeah,
that's the core, what the book's going to be, and you've actually done a lot of work there. That's your MVP. And then when your final version of the book is your product, it's now not minimum viable. It's your main product.
So I'm also conscious that some of our audience members may not actually have products, that they may have a service business that they're interested in. And I just want to sort of find out what you would think is the equivalent of an MVP if you're actually wanting to set up a service business.
Yeah, well, actually, it's surprisingly, it's called a minimum viable service, an MVS, and it's so analogous. If you think of your service as a product and you understand the MVP part of it, your service is effectively your minimum viable service. And that could be, so you may have a very broad service, but the core part of your service is solving a particular problem. So your minimum viable service in that case would be to go out and sell units, in most cases it's time units, of that core service that solves a particular problem. So you can,
or it could be another unit, could be experiences. I mean, let's say you're setting up a bungee jumping company, then essentially every time somebody does a bungee jump, that's a unit, isn't it? So
yeah, and it's and you have your base package, but it might be your main service is a adventure holiday for bungee enthusiasts.
Yeah.
The one thing you want to be able to focus on is the bungee part of it as your minimum viable service.
Yes.
But it's part of the bigger product, which could be your adventure holiday.
Well, that's right, because you're then building things out from that. And if you've got the license for an amazing location for doing that, and you're preventing anybody else from using that location, then I guess you've got a USP as well, haven't you? So
yeah. There's a lot. These all sound quite technical terms, but it's very simply that it's all part of this lean model of don't do too much work until you've tested all your assumptions. So at each stage, you test assumptions, you experiment, you step back, because we all think that the products and the services we produce, everybody's going to want and love. And as we start to put them together, we add all the bells and whistles, and often it all gets quite confusing. So it's about sticking to core principles, keeping things very lean, testing and understanding what you're testing. And so it's an iterative process.
Well, that's the next and final stage, actually, Simon, which is moving quite nicely into a segue to talk about business strategy and planning. So because you're not going to get investment until you've actually, sold some of your, MVPs in quote marks,
Yeah, and it's quite a wide topic, actually, the planning and investment side. Where do I start on that? I think first of all, just from my personal experience and the people I work with, we mostly only write business plans when we're seeking outside funding, loans, or investors coming in and investing in our business. Most of the time when we launch a business or start a business, we do to-do lists. What do I need to do next? And we just go through our to-do list. Rarely do we sit down and write a big business plan just for ourselves and operate off it. It's mostly somebody wants to see that we can put forward the trajectory of the business and that we understand where it's going to get to, and give them some confidence about how we're going to run it. So there are sort of two types of plan here now. One for investors and one that's operational. And usually the one for investors, there's quite a lot of fantasy in that. because we can't predict the future. So it's really difficult to say that we are going to penetrate $1 billion market with a 6% penetration, giving the investor 10 times return in 3 years for what they put in, and all of these great, because we have no idea. What the investors want to see is that we can put together a proper plan that makes sense, and that the little bits and pieces in there all stack up as a possible scenario. But if we're actually going to do it, launch the business without investors, we normally don't put a plan together when we should. We should actually really put together what we call a bootstrap plan, a plan using our own money and our friends and family money and the money that we've got from loans and things like that. And we should put together a plan that's based on real costs. So if we're saying that we need to find our first customers and we're going to find them through email marketing, social media marketing, etc., what are going to be the costs of outsourcing that work if we don't have the skills in-house? If we're going to build an MVP, do we have the skills in-house, or do we need to pay somebody to build them? So it's all about putting together these plans, bootstrap plans, very operational, all about costs, because we can't assume we're going to make money at that stage. Investor ones are possible rosy scenarios in the future, because this is a very scalable idea. So they're quite different plans, but both important.
Yeah, although accepting all of that, I think part of the plan should be, as our friends John Dugdale talks about. He says you need to be working out how to create purchase orders on day one and send invoices and things. So, you need to know how you're going to make money right at the beginning.
Well, that's our business model. And what's really good now is using things like the Lean Canvas and Business Model Canvas right from day one. And I think these are incredible tools that have only been around the last 10 years. It feels to me like they've been around a lot longer. But what they do is they're single page documents. We're split up into different sections, and you fill out what's the problem, what's my solution, and who's my customer segments. But you also have the business model in there. What are my costs? What is the revenue? What are my routes to market? And you fill in each part, and you get the viability part of how viable is your idea, is your business plan. If it costs you more, Chris, to make something, then you're going to sell it. You're not going to be in business very long.
No, sure. But I guess one thing that isn't actually part of a traditional business model canvas, for example, or even a value proposition canvas, is some idea of a timeline. Whether you're scheduling when you're going to actually do things and in which sequence.
Well, there is a box called key milestones.
Oh, okay.
And right. so you're leading towards what are the key milestones in my in to prove my business model and where I get to.
But it's quite useful to look at that in terms of like a Gantt chart or that kind of thing, because it's more visual then,
Well, there's some really good tools out there to do that. There's one that we use at 12 Ronnies called StratNav app, which brings in the business model, but also brings in the other parts of the strategy, so that you put in initiatives, actions, who does what by when, and it produces your Gantt charts as well as all the business models for you.
Yeah. And as we've only got like about 5 minutes left, this seems like a good opportunity to kind of wrap everything up in a bow in terms of the whole process of having an idea and then launch, going through the various stages to launch it. Because at 12 Ronnies, we've been developing some resources, haven't we, recently, in terms of an idea validation plan and a launch plan. So maybe, Simon, you could have a few words about that.
Yeah, I think what one of the things that we've been doing lately, which is a slight pivot on the way we've been operating previously, is we've recognized there's such a demand for investment at the pre-seed stage, at the pre-launch stage of a business. And we've spent a lot of time bringing expertise in, mentors and advisors into to help founders and to effectively help them to understand that investors don't really like investing in ideas. They like investing in sales. They like scaling sales, not giving you money to test your ideas. And but given the demand there is for investment, and people may need money to build their MVP in order to go out to the market, and there are investors that do put money there, even though it's not their favorite investment class. What we've been pivoting part of our service towards is, well, what do investors really want at this early stage? Well, firstly, if they can't have sales, they want to see some form of traction. So they want to see you validate your idea. So one of the big services, and probably our core product in what we do at 12 Ronnies, is idea validation. We help founders find out, is there a customer need for what they're doing? Is the demand side of their business model? And then the next part is, and you touched on it, Chris, about the business plans. The next part we do is about putting a proper plan together. So we use strategists, business strategists, to put together launch plans that include the real costs, not the fantasy costs. However, we also bring in those that have financial expertise to put in the prediction side, so that the business plan can also have a pitch deck coming out of it. Now, investors, if they've got a proper business plan to look at, and they know that the idea has been validated, there is some traction, there is evidence of a customer need, then they're going to be a lot more interested in looking at that plan, knowing that there's some customer need behind it and that it's been professionally constructed. So we've been putting that all together as a sequence to be able to do warm introductions to investors, because that's the other thing about investors. They see so many pitch decks, they see so many business plans, and it's that they have to go through and do their due diligence on them themselves, and they much prefer a warm introduction. And so that's part of what we're doing now, is we're doing some warm introductions to investors based on solid plans, professional plans, and customer need.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you one more question after I show the 12 Ronnies website, because that's where you can find details about how to take the quiz that Simon's been talking about, and to find out more about the different plans that we've also been talking about. So I will retire that now. But one last thing, Simon. I mean, let's say you've now launched. What happens now?
My gosh! Well, you sail off into the sunset. You make all your millions. And then you sell it for millions, and it's happy days. Or in most cases, that's when the real hard work starts.
I was going to say, it's not I mean, launching isn't an end in itself. It's just the next stage, isn't it?
And you're still a startup. You're not really a fully fledged company, because this is the other part of it. We, up to the launch stage and the early stages of launching, you're launching to early adopters. You're launching based on an MVP. You're still in lean startup mode. You're very much a learning organization, not a fully fledged company. And you will be for quite a while, until you get this magic thing called product market fit, until you find exactly what your product fits with what market, what everybody wants in the main market, and then you become a company. Then you can build the right structure to service a whole market. So at the launch stage, what happens next? You're still a learning organization. You're serving your early adopters. You're still learning. It's a very iterative process, and you're
going to have to need to talk to people and to take advice and to perhaps involve some mentors or some coaches, even beyond launching.
Yeah, it's built. It's now further building your team out. It's further building expertise into your company. Some of your early co-founders might not be suited to scaling the business. They might not want to be suited to. I'm a prime example. I like working in the messy entrepreneurial ecosystem of ideas and trying to get them into products or services, trying to find customers for them. But once a company is launched and we're starting to build and scale, that's not my expertise. It's not what I enjoy, and it's what other people are very good at. It's different people. Companies evolve.
Yeah, and 12 Ronnies is building relationships and connections with other organizations and companies that can help people as they go on their journey beyond the launch. So kind of watch this space in terms of service providers and other people that we can recommend and signpost you to once you've launched. Okay, well, Simon, that was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
End of another session. We'll have another one next week at the same time. And we will, if you've got any ideas for titles that you'd like us to cover, please do let us know by putting it in the comments for this, for the platform that you've been watching this session on. Otherwise, we'll come up with something suitably pithy, no doubt. Just to say, you know, as I said at the beginning, make sure you like the videos, that you subscribe to the channel, and that you sign up for the notifications so that you know when we're going live. Otherwise, thank you very much again, Simon, and we'll see you all again same time next week.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye for now. Bye-bye.